Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
The wind blew softly through the trees of Erin Lasgalen, whispering through the golden leaves that still clung to the tall beeches of the woodland realm. Dawn was breaking, pale and cool, casting silver light across the forest floor. From high among the branches came the sound of song, soft voices of elves greeting the new day. Yet beneath their gentle melody lingered a shadow, a silence that no music could quite dispel. For though the Dark Lord was fallen and the ring destroyed, the wounds of Middle-earth were slow to heal. Deep in the northern forest, where the trees grew black and close, strange things had begun to stir again. Hunters had gone missing. Caravans from Dale had failed to arrive. The paths once thought safe now seemed haunted by unseen eyes. And so it was that on a cool morning in late autumn, Legolas Greenleaf, prince of the woodland realm, returned home. He came lightly through the trees, his boots barely whispering upon the roots and leaves. His hair shone like spun sunlight. Though travel and war had hardened his face, he had been long away, dwelling in Ithilien beside the Anduin, where he and his companions were restoring that fair land after the shadow's fall. Yet now, drawn by tidings of unrest, he had come north once more to the home of his father, Thranduil. The great gates of the woodland hall stood open to him, and the guards bowed as he entered. Within, torches burned low in carved stone sconces, their light flickering upon the polished pillars and the carvings of oak and beech. Legolas passed through the echoing hall until he came to the throne room, where King Thranduil sat upon his carven chair of roots and silverwood. "Welcome home, my son," said Thranduil, rising as Legolas approached. His voice was warm, though his eyes held weariness. "You return in dark times once more, though the world beyond our borders grows brighter." Legolas bowed slightly. "I have heard troubling tidings, Father. Your messengers reached me in Ithilien. Tell me, what shadow lies now upon the north?" Thranduil gestured for him to sit beside the hearth, where a long fire burned with golden flame. "The shadow is gone, yet its echo lingers. In the northern reaches of the forest, near the roots of the gray mountains, our scouts have vanished. Hunters have been found slain, or not at all. Some say they heard heavy steps in the night, and the breaking of trees as if by giant hands." Legolas frowned, his keen eyes narrowing. "Trolls?" Thranduil nodded slowly. "So we fear? Once long ago they roamed those hills, but none have been seen since the fall of Dol Guldur. Now they return, or something that drives them forth." Legolas was silent for a moment, listening to the fire's soft crackle. "And what of the people? Are the northern settlements still held?" "Barely," said the king. "We have drawn back to safer ground. I have sent scouts, but few have returned. The darkness there grows thicker with each passing moon, yet I will not risk more lives until I know what stirs." Legolas rose. "Then I will go." Thranduil's gaze was sharp. "You are weary from your long road, my son. There are others who can take this task." "No," said Legolas quietly. "If trolls have indeed returned, then I would see it with my own eyes. Once before I hunted them in the Misty Mountains, beside Aragorn of Gondor. If such creatures now prowl our lands, they will not go unchallenged." For a moment the king studied him in silence. Then he sighed. "So be it. Take whomever you trust most, but be swift and cautious. There are powers older than trolls that may yet sleep in those hills." Legolas bowed. "I will not fail you." That evening he went down to the stables where the elves kept their swift forest steeds. He chose Arod, his faithful gray horse who had borne him through war and shadow. 3 companions he took, Taver and Larian, skilled archers of the Northern Guard, and Nendrith, a tracker whose sight was keen even in moonlight. Together they prepared quietly through the night, for they would ride at dawn. When the first light touched the trees, they set forth northward under the canopy of gold and green. The forest around them was fair still, filled with the whisper of leaves and the soft rush of distant streams. But as they passed beyond the borders of the king's realm, the air grew colder, the light dimmer. Moss crept thick upon the trees, and the ground turned dark with rot. By the second day they reached a lonely glade where the trees stood far apart. There they rested beside a fallen oak. Nendrith knelt by the earth, brushing away leaves to reveal deep, uneven prints. "Here," he said softly. "Something heavy passed this way. Days ago perhaps, but it was no beast of the forest." Legolas crouched beside him. The prints were broad, 3-toed, and sunk deep into the mud. A grim light came into his eyes. "Trolls indeed," he murmured, "and many of them." Larian glanced uneasily toward the dark trees beyond. Why would they come south? The sun turns them to stone. They would not dare it unless something drives them, said Legolas. That night they made camp beneath an ancient oak, though none slept easily. The air was thick with dread, and more than once they heard strange sounds in the distance, like the grinding of stone or the breaking of branches. The moon rose pale through a shroud of mist, and Legolas stood long upon a hillock, his keen eyes turned north. Far away he thought he saw a flicker of firelight between the trees. Not the warm glow of a camp, but a dull red gleam like embers smoldering in the heart of a pit. When dawn came, he said nothing of what he had seen, but his heart was heavy, for he felt in that faint red light the touch of something old and cruel, something that should have perished with Sauron's fall, and so their hunt began. The next day dawned gray and sullen, with clouds hanging low over the forest canopy. A faint drizzle fell, whispering through the leaves like ghostly voices. Legolas and his company moved northward in silence, their cloaks drawn close against the chill. The further they went, the darker the woods became. The golden leaves of the southern groves were gone. Here the trees stood ancient and bare, their branches twisted like the arms of sleepers caught in a nightmare. For 2 days they found little but silence and shadow. Yet signs of disturbance marked the land. Trees broken as though by immense force, clawed stones, and patches of earth blackened by strange fire. Once, near a dried riverbed, they found the remnants of a campsite, a broken bow, a torn cloak, and a single silver brooch shaped like a leaf of Lorien. Larian knelt and touched the trinket gently. "One of ours," he said. His voice was quiet, but beneath it burned grief. Legolas took the brooch and studied the ground. The tracks around it were heavy, confused, a struggle. Then, leading away into the dark of the forest, he saw the deep, misshapen prints again. "They dragged them north," he said grimly. "The trolls move by night, and they do not come alone." That evening, as the rain thickened and dusk began to fall, they came upon an old watchtower half buried in ivy. The stone was cracked and worn by centuries, yet its form was still proud, a remnant of the watch posts that once guarded the borders of Greenwood the Great. Legolas called a halt. "We will take shelter here," he said. "The rain hides many sounds, and we must not be caught unprepared." They entered through the broken archway, their footsteps echoing faintly in the hollow ruin. The tower's roof had long since fallen in, but the lower chambers were dry enough. Arod and the other horses were led within, and a small fire was kindled to drive out the chill. The flickering light cast long shadows upon the stone walls, revealing carvings almost lost to time, trees, stars, and the shapes of elven sentinels from an age before the shadow came. As night deepened, Nendrith stood watch upon the doorway. The rain ceased, and silence settled once more over the land. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, listening, waiting. The fire burned low, and Legolas sat beside it, turning the silver brooch over in his fingers. He remembered the days when Mirkwood had been full of laughter and song, when the light of the stars fell clear through the branches. Now it seemed that every path was haunted by memory. He wondered for the first time if even after Sauron's fall, the forest would ever be truly free. Then faint and far off came a sound, the heavy thud of something vast moving through the trees. Nendrith stiffened. "My lord," he whispered. Legolas was already standing, his bow in hand. The others rose silently beside him. The sound grew louder, branches breaking, earth trembling. Then the air filled with a stench, like rotting stone. "Hide the fire," Legolas murmured. The flame was swiftly smothered, leaving only the pale light of the moon filtering through the gaps in the roof. Moments later, 3 hulking shapes loomed from the forest edge. Even in the dim light, their forms were dreadful. Trolls, massive and foul, their gray hides glistening with rain. They moved clumsily but with dreadful strength, sniffing the air like beasts. One let out a guttural growl deep as thunder. Another stooped, snuffling near the broken wall. Legolas raised his bow. The string whispered, and an arrow flew, striking the nearest troll square in the chest. It roared in pain, the sound echoing through the woods like a storm. "Now!" cried Legolas, and the elves loosed their arrows in swift, silent fury. Shafts struck eyes and throats, but the creatures came on, maddened by pain. The first troll tore through the wall with its great fists, stone and dust exploding outward. Larian leapt aside just in time. Another troll crashed against the archway, shattering it to rubble. The elves scattered, darting between fallen beams and crumbling walls. Legolas sprang up a broken stair and loosed 2 more arrows, driving one into the beast's gaping mouth. It bellowed, clutching its jaw, and stumbled backward, but did not fall. Nendrith struck from behind with his long knife, but the creature swung blindly, hurling him against the stones. "Taver!" shouted Legolas. "Drive them toward the light." For though the night was thick, dawn was near. The eastern sky had begun to pale. Taver fired again and again, his arrows flashing like silver sparks. The trolls turned in confusion, retreating toward the broken archway, but the smallest of the 3, though small was a poor word for such a monster, caught sight of Legolas upon the stair and charged, its eyes burning with hate. Legolas leapt clear as the stair collapsed beneath the troll's weight. He landed lightly, rolled, and drew his long, white knife. The beast swung, missing by inches. Legolas darted beneath its arm and struck deep into its side. Black blood splattered across the stones, and the creature howled. Then, as if in answer to its cry, a strange light flickered across the forest beyond the tower, a red, smoldering glow. The trolls froze for a heartbeat, as though listening to some silent command. Then, snarling, they turned to flee northward into the trees. Legolas made to pursue, but stopped. The air was thick with the smell of burning, though no fire was near. Upon the ground where the trolls had stood, something gleamed faintly. He knelt and lifted it. It was a fragment of metal, dark, twisted, carved with faint runes. A chill ran through him as he studied it. He knew that craft. It was wrought in the style of Dol Guldur. Nendreth limped forward, his face pale. "What is it?" "An ensorcelled shard," Legolas said softly. "A charm of binding. Whoever bears this may command the will of lesser beasts." He straightened, his expression hardening. These trolls were not wandering by chance. They were sent. Larion looked toward the dark forest. "But by whom? The Dark Lord is gone." Legolas's gaze followed the troll's trail into the mist. "Not all his servants perished with him," he said. "Some shadows cling long after the light has returned." He turned to his companions. "We go north at first light. If there is one who dares wield the craft of Dol Guldur again, we must find him and end it." They slept little that night. The forest lay still as stone, yet all felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from afar. And when dawn came, pale and cold, Legolas mounted Arod without a word. The red glow in the northern sky had faded, but in his heart he knew their journey had only begun. Thus they rode into the deepening shadow, where even the birds did not sing, and the trees whispered of ancient dread. The hunt was no longer for beasts alone, but for the dark hand that guided them, one that would soon reveal itself in fire and death. For 3 days they followed the trail of the trolls northward. The land grew wilder, colder, and more silent with each passing league. The trees stood taller here, their trunks gray with age, their roots like the bones of giants thrusting from the earth. The paths twisted endlessly, choked with brambles and mist, and the light of the sun seldom touched the ground. Legolas led the way, his keen eyes finding every faint mark upon the forest floor, broken branches, the deep dents of clawed feet, and the black slime that oozed where the trolls had rested. A foul taint hung in the air, stronger with each mile. On the 4th day they came upon a ravine, narrow and steep, where a cold stream whispered between mossy stones. The tracks descended into the depths and vanished among the rocks. Tavor knelt beside the water, his hand brushing the surface. "Blood," he murmured, "old but still red." Nendreth's sharp gaze swept the cliffs above. "There are caves here," he said. "Perhaps the trolls took shelter." Legolas nodded. "Then we shall see what lair they have made." They left the horses tethered in the shelter of the trees and descended into the ravine. The air grew colder, and a dim mist clung to the stones. Halfway down they found a narrow crevice leading into darkness. A foul smell poured from it, stale air and decay. Torches were lit, and with drawn bows they entered the cave. The passage wound downward, the walls wet and glistening. The floor was littered with bones, deer, wolves, and darker remains that once had been men or elves. At the end of the passage, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. A faint red glow flickered there, pulsing like a heart. Legolas raised his hand. "Stay," he whispered. The elves crouched low behind a fallen slab of stone, peering into the hollow. At the chamber's center stood a rough altar of black stone, upon which burned a flame not of wood or oil, but of something strange and cold. a red fire that gave no warmth. Around it were strewn shards of iron, bones carved with runes, and the shattered heads of stone trolls, as though they had been fashioned or unmade there. And before the altar knelt a figure cloaked in shadow. The figure's hands moved over the fire, shaping it with gestures both graceful and terrible. Words of the black speech echoed faintly, twisting through the air like serpents. Larion's breath caught. "A sorcerer," he whispered. Legolas's eyes hardened. He could feel the wrongness in that voice, the lingering venom of Dol Guldur. "A remnant of Sauron's craft," he said softly. "One who has not yet learned that the darkness has fallen." The sorcerer straightened suddenly, his hood turning toward the shadows where the elves hid. "Come forth," he said, his voice rasping yet powerful. "I smell the wood smoke of Thranduil's folk." Their hiding was useless. Legolas rose, drawing his bow. "The servants of Eren Lasgallen stand before you," he said clearly. "Name yourself, Shadow, or you will fall where you stand." The figure laughed, a sound like stones grinding. "I am none of your father's concern, Greenleaf. I served the Great Eye when your people hid trembling in their trees. But the eye is gone, and I who was his hand remain." He stretched out a pale arm from beneath his cloak. Upon his wrist hung a band of dark metal, carved with runes that glowed faintly red. "I command what stone remembers. The trolls heed my will, and soon all the north will tremble again." Legolas loosed an arrow. It flew straight and true, but as it neared the figure, it shuddered in midair and turned to ash. The sorcerer hissed, spreading his hands wide. The red fire flared high, and from the shadows beyond the altar came a rumbling roar. The earth shook as two shapes rose, trolls greater than any they had yet seen, their skins gray and rough as granite, their eyes burning with crimson light. Chains of iron hung from their limbs, and upon their foreheads were marks seared by the same red flame. "By the Valar," breathed Larion, "he has bound them." "Then we must break his hold," said Legolas. "Aim for the runes, strike where the light burns brightest." The trolls advanced, each step shaking the ground. The elves scattered, loosing arrows that flashed in the gloom. Shafts struck true, but the creatures felt no pain. One troll swung its arm, smashing through the stone where Tavor had stood a heartbeat before. The other roared, a blast of heat spilling from its mouth like the breath of a furnace. Legolas darted across the chamber, leaping from rock to rock. He drew and fired in a single motion, sending arrows into the glowing rune upon the nearest troll's chest. The light dimmed, and the creature stumbled, bellowing in confusion. The sorcerer shrieked, "Fools! You meddle with powers beyond your kin!" He raised his hands, and the red fire gathered into a sphere that shot toward Legolas. Legolas rolled aside as the blast struck the wall, shattering it and filling the air with dust. He rose swiftly, drawing his long white knives. "If you live by fire, Shadow, then fire shall consume you." With a cry he sprang forward. The sorcerer raised his staff to strike, but Legolas was faster. His blade flashed in the red light, cutting through the iron band upon the man's wrist. There was a burst of flame, a scream that seemed to shake the stones themselves, and the red fire collapsed into darkness. The trolls staggered, roaring in terror. Their eyes flickered once, twice, and then went out like dying embers. Their bodies turned gray, hardened, and crumbled into heaps of stone. When the dust cleared, the chamber lay silent. Only the faint hiss of dying flame remained. Legolas stood over the fallen figure. The sorcerer's hood had fallen back, revealing a pale, scarred face, once a man of Numenor perhaps, now twisted by long years in dark service. His eyes were empty, his breath gone. Larion approached, bow lowered. "Is it ended?" Legolas gazed at the still burning remnants of the red flame. "For now," he said quietly. But this was no great power, only a remnant, feeding upon the ruins of Dol Guldur's craft. Yet if one such survived, others may still lurk in the dark places of the world. He turned, lifting the small iron shard he had taken from the tower. It pulsed faintly still, though the light within it faded with each moment. He dropped it into the red fire, and it hissed, turning black. "Let the forest breathe again," he murmured. They left the cave before dawn. Behind them the ravine filled with mist, and by morning the entrance was hidden, as though it had never been. The sun rose weakly over the eastern hills, glinting through the high branches. Nendrith spoke as they mounted their horses. "Will you tell the king all that has passed?" Legolas's eyes lingered on the fading smoke above the trees. "Yes," he said at last, "but not all evils are ended by the sword. Some linger in memory, waiting for the heart to forget. We must guard against that most of all." They rode south once more, their hearts heavy yet proud, for though the shadow of Dol Guldur had reached again toward Arren-les-Galan, it had been driven back. And as they passed through the forest's outer glades, the wind began to stir among the branches once more, soft like a sigh of relief, carrying the scent of green things growing and the promise that even after long darkness light endures. The journey southward was long and heavy with silence. Though the red fire in the north had been extinguished, the memory of its glow lingered in the minds of Legolas and his companions. For a time they spoke little. Each rode with eyes turned to the path and thoughts shadowed by what they had seen. The forest, too, seemed changed, as if it had watched their struggle and now waited to see whether the peace they had restored would endure. On the third day of their return, they came again into the lighter woods where shafts of golden sunlight broke through the canopy. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the distant sound of running water brought a strange comfort. Yet even here, all was not as it had been. They passed through a small glen where once the elves had kept a waypost of carved birch, and found it blackened and torn, the mark of claws upon its trunk. "The trolls came farther south than we knew," said Taver, frowning. "Had we delayed longer, they might have reached the settlements." "Perhaps they were meant to," Legolas replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes were keen and troubled. The sorcerer's hand was not that of a brute beast. He sought to drive fear deep into our land, to stir the old dread of the shadow. Larion looked up at him. "And do you think others may come, now that he is gone?" Legolas did not answer at once. He watched a hawk circle high above the trees, its cry faint against the wind. "There will always be those who remember the taste of power," he said at last. "But Mirkwood is not what it was. We are no longer a people who hide from the darkness. Should others rise, they will find the forest awake and watchful." That night they camped by the banks of a clear stream that flowed south toward the forest river. Stars shimmered on its surface, and the soft sound of water carried through the stillness. For the first time in many nights, they lit a bright fire and sat beside it, their bows laid aside. Nendrith, who had spoken little since the battle, drew from his pack a small wooden pipe carved in the shape of a leaf. He filled it with dried herbs and lit it from the flame. "Strange," he murmured between slow breaths. "We fight shadows and fire, yet it is the silence afterward that feels heaviest." Larian nodded. "Aye, the forest is quieter now, but not in peace. It listens." Legolas looked into the fire. The flickering light caught in his gray eyes, and for a moment he seemed far away. "Do you know," he said softly, "when I was a child, I thought the forest alive and more than spirit, that the trees themselves could speak. My father told me it was folly, that only in Fangorn did such things happen, yet I have often wondered if he was wrong. Sometimes the trees do not need voices to tell us what they know." The wind stirred the leaves, whispering faintly in answer, and they fell into silence again. When morning came, they rose early, for the king's halls were yet many leagues ahead. The forest grew lighter as they rode, until the sunlight streamed unhindered through the canopy. The air smelled of moss and cedar, and birds sang once more among the branches. The shadow was fading, though Legolas still felt its echo behind him, like the memory of a wound that is not yet healed. By evening, they came to the outer gates of the woodland realm. The guards upon the bridge hailed them with glad cries, for word of their departure had spread far, and no tidings had yet returned. When they saw the prince unharmed, they bowed low and led the company within. The great halls of Thranduil glittered with lamplight and song that night. Word of the victory spread swiftly, and the elves rejoiced that the north was freed of its peril. Yet in the midst of the celebration, Legolas's thoughts were far away. When the feast had ended and the torches burned low, he sought his father's private chamber, where the king sat alone beside a still pool of clear water. Thranduil looked up as he entered. "So my son returns from Shadow again," he said with quiet warmth. "And the trolls?" "Destroyed," said Legolas, "yet they were not the true enemy. A servant of Dol Guldur had bound them to his will. He is slain, but his craft was strong. It may not have perished with him." The king's gaze grew grave. "I feared as much. Even broken swords can cut deep when wielded by desperate hands. Tell me all that you saw." Legolas did so, sparing no detail. The altar, the runes, the fire that burned cold and red, and the man who had once served the dark power. When he finished, Thranduil was silent for a long while. Then he rose and went to the pool, looking down into the water's surface. "There are wounds upon this land that will not heal for many years," the king said. "The shadow is gone, but its poison lingers. You have done well, Legolas, yet I see in your eyes that this victory brings you no joy." Legolas's voice was low. "It is hard to take joy in killing a creature so far fallen from light. He was once a man of Númenor, father. I saw it in his face. Even the proudest of the West may be twisted by long service to darkness. I wonder how many such lost souls still wander the world." "Few, perhaps," Thranduil answered. "But it takes only one to kindle the embers again. That is why we must remain watchful. The peace of our age will depend not on the strength of our arms, but on our memory of what has been." Legolas nodded. "Then I will not forget." Thranduil's expression softened. "Nor will I. You have done more than I could ask. Rest now, my son. The north is safe again, thanks to you." But rest did not come easily. When Legolas lay that night beneath the carved ceiling of his chamber, sleep drifted near, but would not hold him. He dreamed of red fire burning beneath the mountains, of stone figures weeping molten tears. and of a voice whispering from the dark, low and cold, like wind in a hollow cave. He woke before dawn, his heart restless. The forest outside his window was still silver with mist. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl cried, its mournful call fading into silence. Legolas rose, took his cloak, and went out into the night. He climbed the winding paths that led high into the upper woods, where the stars shone clear between the leaves. There he stood long, listening to the quiet murmur of the forest. And slowly, a calm came upon him. The darkness was gone. The trolls were no more. Yet the world had changed. He knew now that peace was not the absence of evil, but the will to stand against it whenever it rose again. As the first light of morning touched the trees, Legolas turned his face to the east. Somewhere beyond those distant lands lay Ithilien, his new home, where gardens would bloom upon ground once scorched by war. He smiled faintly. "The world still needs tending," he murmured, "and the trees will grow again." Then he descended from the hill and walked back toward the halls of his father, where the first songs of dawn were rising. The forest stirred beneath the sunlight, green and gold once more, and the wind through the branches seemed to whisper words of hope. For those shadows had crept again into the north, the light of the elves had not dimmed, and Legolas Greenleaf, son of Thranduil, carried it onward into the new age of Middle-earth. Spring came slowly to Arren-les-Galan. For many weeks the forest lay still, beneath a shroud of pale mist, as though it too were weary after long struggle. Then little by little life began to stir again. Buds unfurled on the branches, streams broke their icy silence, and faint bird song returned to the glades where none had been heard since the days before the shadow. Legolas spent those early days in quiet labor, walking among the woods with his people, restoring what war and darkness had taken. Trees felled by fire were cleared, roots unbound from stone, and new saplings planted where the earth was scarred. In every grove he felt the slow heartbeat of renewal. Yet his heart was not at ease, for though the trolls were gone and their master slain, the memory of that red flame still haunted him. Often at dusk, as the light faded beneath the trees, he would pause and glance northward, half expecting to see that dreadful glow upon the horizon once more. It was on such an evening, when the first stars were kindling over the forest, that Larion found him standing upon the high terrace above the king's halls. "You look north again, my lord," said the elf softly. "Does the shadow still trouble you?" Legolas turned, a faint smile on his lips. "Not the shadow itself, but I have learned that peace is never so certain as we wish. There are still wild places in Middle-earth where darkness clings like mist to stone. Until all lands are free, my heart will not be still." Larion inclined his head. "Then perhaps it is time to travel again. Word has come from the south. Your friends in Ithilien ask for you. They say the gardens flourish, yet their master's heart is restless without the trees of greenwood beside him." Legolas's eyes brightened at that.
Aragorn writes, "A messenger from Gondor brought a letter at dawn," Larion said, producing a small scroll sealed with the white tree. "The king of the reunited realm bids you come when you may, for there is much to rebuild, and he would have your counsel in matters of the wild." Legolas took the letter and broke the seal. The words within were written in Aragorn's strong, clear hand. To Legolas Greenleaf, son of Thranduil, prince of the woodland realm, friend of the fellowship and of all free folk, Ithilien grows fair, Yet we are few, and there is much to do. The wild still presses near our borders, and though Sauron is fallen, evil does not die in a day. Come, if your heart so wills it, and help us turn shadow into green once more." Legolas read the words twice, then folded the letter carefully. "The call of the trees is strong," he murmured, "and Aragorn speaks truly. Evil seldom dies in a day." He looked toward the forest below, where the lanterns of his father's halls gleamed through the mist like fallen stars. "Tell my father I will speak with him at dawn," he said. "Perhaps the time has come for me to journey once more." When the first light touched the treetops, Legolas went before Thranduil. The king received him with a mixture of pride and sorrow, for he knew what was to be said. "You will go south again," he said quietly. "I must," replied Legolas. "Aragorn calls for aid, and the land of Ithilien needs healing still. There is strength in the woods of the north, but it must be shared. The time of the elves wanes, yet while we remain, we must leave light wherever we walk." Thranduil regarded him long. "I will not forbid you," he said at last. "Your path lies beyond my halls now. Yet remember this, my son. Though your heart is bound to the wide world, Aaron Lasgallen is still your home. When you grow weary of travel, return to us. The forest will always know your step." Legolas bowed deeply. "I will return, father. When the leaves fall golden again, perhaps I shall come with tidings of peace." Preparations were swift. By evening, a small company was ready to ride with him. Larian, faithful as ever, Nendreth, whose keen eyes were second only to his own, and Tavor, who had sworn to serve wherever the prince went. Arod, his steadfast steed, was waiting, strong and bright-eyed despite many journeys. As they departed, the elves of the realm gathered upon the bridge, singing songs of blessing. Their voices rose clear and high, echoing among the trees like the sound of water over stone. Legolas turned once, raising his hand in farewell, then led his companions into the southern paths. For several days they rode through lands still wild and green, where deer fled at their passing, and the scent of spring flowers followed them. They crossed the forest river, passed the borders of Dale, and came at last to the empty lands that lay between the greenwood and the Anduin. The river gleamed like silver in the sun, broad and swift. Beyond it lay the plains of Rohan, and far to the south, the faint blue haze of the Efelduth. One night, as they camped upon the riverbank, Nendrith said, "The world changes swiftly. Men rebuild their cities until the fields again. Yet I wonder, will they remember what was lost?" Legolas looked across the water toward the faint lights of distant villages. "Men remember through their deeds," he said. "They may forget the names of the elves, but not the beauty we leave behind. Every tree planted, every shadow lifted, that is remembrance enough." In the days that followed, they rode swiftly down the Anduin, sometimes through country green and fair, sometimes through ruins where old stones lay broken and moss-covered. At last the air grew sweet with the scent of blooming orchards, and they entered Ithilien. There the land was waking once more. Gardens stretched upon the hills, bright with flowers of many hues. Young trees stood in rows, and the sound of water filled the air. Legolas felt joy stir within him, for the place had changed much since last he walked it. Upon a hill overlooking the vale of Eamon Arnon stood a house of white stone, newly built. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, and before it stood a tall figure in simple raiment, his dark hair touched with silver. "Aragorn," said Legolas softly,
The king of Gondor came forward smiling, his eyes alight. Legolas, by the valor, it gladdens my heart to see you. They clasped hands in greeting, and for a moment neither spoke, for memory lay deep between them. At length Aragorn said, "You come at last, as I hoped you would. The shadow's scars are deep in this land, but with your help, we shall make it bloom again." Legolas looked out over the green hills, where new life was rising from ruin. "It will bloom, my friend," he said quietly. "And perhaps one day, when all is healed, we may hear the laughter of elves beside the men of Gondor, and no darkness between us." Aragorn smiled. "Then let us begin." So it was that Legolas Greenleaf took his place beside the king of Gondor, and together they labored to make Ithilien fair again. The forest of the north was behind him, yet its spirit went with him still, strong, patient, and enduring as the roots of the world. And though the shadows of the past had not wholly vanished, hope had taken root anew, deep in the soil of Middle-earth. The days in Ithilien passed swiftly for Legolas and his companions. The land, though scarred by war, seemed eager to live again. From the white walls of Minas Tirith to the shadowed slopes beneath the Ephel Duath, men worked side by side with elves, clearing the remnants of the past. Where once the air had stunk of ash and ruin, the scent of new growth now drifted, wildflowers, pine, and the soft breath of the river. Legolas walked often among the trees he had planted in those first days after the War of the Ring. They had grown tall, their leaves whispering like a choir in the morning wind. Here and there he paused to touch a young beech or elm, feeling its quiet strength rise from the earth. "The roots take hold," he said one morning to Aragorn, who had come riding from the city to see the progress of his realm. "The forest remembers even when men do not." Aragorn smiled, though his eyes were tired from long rule. "If they remember, it is because of you, my friend. Ithilien was a land of shadows, but now the people call it the Green Prince's Garden." Legolas's brow lifted slightly, amusement glinting in his gray eyes. "A fair title, though I claim no dominion here. The trees are their own masters." "And yet," said Aragorn, "they grow best where your hand has touched them." They walked together down a winding path lined with birches until they reached a small glade. In the center of it, a clear spring bubbled up between smooth stones, its surface reflecting the sky. A family of men worked nearby, setting stones to form a channel for the water. The youngest among them, a child no older than 7, looked up and gasped when he saw Legolas. "Look, father," he cried, "it's the Elf Lord!" Legolas smiled and knelt, the sunlight gleaming upon his hair. "And who are you, young master of men?" The boy blinked, awestruck. I am Baranor, son of Fereth. My father says you brought the trees back." "Then your father speaks kindly," said Legolas, "but it is the trees themselves that chose to return. We only opened the way." He took from his belt a small seed in a carved wooden shell and placed it in the boy's hand. "Plant this where the light first touches the ground at dawn. When it grows, remember that every great tree begins as something small and humble." The boy's eyes shone. "I will, my lord." Aragorn watched with quiet pride. "You have the heart of a teacher, Legolas. You plant more than trees." Legolas rose, brushing the soil from his hands. "Perhaps, yet even the smallest seed must take root in willing ground." That night, after the king had returned to Minas Tirith, Legolas stood upon a high ridge overlooking the Anduin. The river gleamed silver beneath the moon, winding southward toward the sea. His thoughts drifted north to Aaron Lasgalen, to the voice of his father, to the song of the forest that had raised him. He felt its call even now, soft and sorrowful, like music from a distant shore. Larian approached quietly, carrying a lantern. "You stand too long in the wind, my lord," he said. "The night grows cold." Legolas did not turn. "It is not the cold that holds me, but the sound. The river speaks of the sea tonight." "The sea?" Larian frowned. "You have spoken of it before, but I have never seen it. Does it truly call to you?" Legolas's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Yes, I heard it first in the gull's cry upon the shores of Gondor after the war. Since then, the sound has never left me. It is both a gift and a sorrow. For the elves are bound to Middle-earth, yet the sea calls us home to the west. One day I will answer that call." Larian's face darkened with unease. "And leave this land forever?" "Perhaps not yet," said Legolas softly. "There is still work to be done. The forest here is young and needs tending, but the call will not sleep forever." In the weeks that followed, Legolas threw himself into his labor. He oversaw the planting of new groves, the building of gardens, and the tending of the young trees that grew along the banks of the Anduin. Men came from the city to learn the ways of the wood, and the friendship between Gondor and the elves deepened. Songs were sung in both tongues, Sindarin and the speech of men, and for the first time in many ages, laughter of both kindreds mingled freely in the wild. Yet even as peace grew, rumors reached their ears of unrest far to the east. Travelers from the lands beyond Mordor spoke of strange shapes moving in the empty wastes, creatures twisted and wandering, remnants of the Dark Lord's armies that had not yet found death or mercy. One evening, as the stars rose above Ithilien, a messenger came to Legolas bearing tidings from the borders of Harandor. "There are shadows there once more," the man said, kneeling before him. "Bands of orcs and wild men, driven north by hunger and madness. The lords of Gondor hold them at bay, but they grow bolder." Legolas's eyes were grave. "Then peace is yet a fragile thing." When Aragorn heard of this, he sent word to all his captains, commanding that the borders be strengthened. "The Shadow's claws are broken," he told Legolas, "but its spirit lingers in men's hearts. We must root it out wherever it hides." Legolas inclined his head. "Then I shall go to the southern marches. The forests there are still dark. Perhaps I may learn what stirs them." Aragorn clasped his hand. "Go then, Greenleaf. But take care. The south remembers old hatreds." So once again Legolas rode into Shadow, not as a warrior of war, but as a warden of peace. With Larian and Nendrith beside him, he journeyed through the deep woods of southern Ithilien, where the light grew thin and the air hung heavy with silence. The trees were older here, their roots clutching at ruins long forgotten. The stones whispered of ancient battles, and the wind carried a faint scent of ash. They rode for many days without sign of foe, yet all felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. On the seventh evening, as they made camp near the ruins of an old watchtower, Nendrith said quietly, "Something moves in these woods. I can feel it. The birds do not sing." Legolas listened. Indeed, the forest was silent. Even the crickets had ceased their song. He rose, his hand upon his bow. "Keep watch. We may not be alone." The moon climbed high, pale and cold. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped, then another. Legolas turned toward the sound, every sense alert. Out of the shadows crept figures, bent and silent, half a dozen at first, then more, Their eyes gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Not trolls nor beasts, but men, ragged, thin, their faces hollow with hunger and fear. They carried crude weapons, and one stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Elf Lord," he rasped, "we seek no quarrel. We fled from the east, from the ashes of Mordor, but the land is dead there, and we starve." Legolas lowered his bow slowly. "You are free men, then? Not servants of the dark?" The man nodded, trembling. "We were once slaves in the forges of Gorgoroth. When the eye fell, we fled, but there is no life in that land, only ruin and death. Grant us passage to the west. We mean no harm." Legolas studied them long. The stench of Mordor still clung to their rags, but he saw no malice in their eyes, only despair. "You may pass," he said at last, "but go to Minas Tirith and seek the king's mercy. There is food and shelter there, if you will labor for peace." The man bowed low, tears streaking the grime upon his cheeks. "Bless you, my lord. May the valor watch over your kind." As they vanished into the night, Larion murmured, "Strange days indeed, when the sons of Mordor seek refuge under the stars." Legolas gazed after them. "The shadow falls in many hearts," he said softly, "but even in darkness, some seek the light. Perhaps this is how the world will be healed, not by war, but by mercy." The dawn that followed was quiet and golden. The birds sang once more, and the forest breathed easily again. Yet Legolas knew that peace, like the new trees he planted, must be tended always, or it would wither and fade. And as the wind whispered through the leaves, he thought once more of the sea, far beyond the mountains and plains, calling softly across the ages, reminding him that even into the fairest lands, all things must one day pass into the west. The sun rose pale above the mountains, casting long beams of light through the morning mist that clung to the southern woods. The company of Legolas broke camp and rode westward, the scent of pine and damp earth thick upon the air. Behind them lay the haunted glades where men from the ashes of Mordor had passed, and ahead stretched the road to Aemon Arnon, where Aragorn's wardens kept watch upon the borders of Ithilien. The days were quiet, yet not empty. Everywhere they passed, Legolas saw the marks of a land struggling to be reborn, villages rising where ruins had lain, new fields tilled where once only ash had fallen. But there were also scars that time alone could not heal, old battlefields where grass would not yet grow, and cairns of stone that marked the fallen of both elves and men. At noon they halted upon a high ridge, where the wind came fresh from the west. Larion shaded his eyes. "The White City lies beyond that river bend," he said. "Even from here one can almost feel her light." Legolas followed his gaze. Far away, faint as a dream, the shining walls of Minas Tirith gleamed in the sun, crowned by the white banner of the king. A faint smile touched his lips. "The city of the kings endures," he said. Once she stood alone against the shadow, and now she shines again. Perhaps one day the light of Ithilien will rival even her beauty. They rode on, crossing the river where it flowed wide and gentle. Fishermen called greetings from their boats, and the scent of bread drifted from a nearby village. For a time it seemed as though the peace of the new age had truly taken root. Yet that night, as the stars came out, a strange unease stole upon the company. They had camped near the ruins of an old bridge, its stones half swallowed by ivy. The air was cool, and the forest around them lay still. Legolas sat apart upon a fallen trunk, his bow across his knees, listening. The night seemed too quiet. Even the usual murmur of insects was gone. "Larion," he he said softly. "Does the forest seem hushed to you?" The elf looked up from the fire. "Aye, as if something waits beyond the trees." Nendrith rose and moved to the edge of the glade, crouching low. After a moment he returned, his face pale. "Tracks," he whispered, "but not of men, small, broad, and many, fresh within the hour." Legolas's eyes hardened. "Orcs, then? I had hoped none remained in these parts." They doused the fire and took positions among the trees. The night deepened. From far off came the faint sound of guttural voices and the clatter of iron. Soon, dark figures emerged between the trunks, 20 or more moving stealthily but without the grace of hunters. They carried curved blades and crude spears, and their leader bore a black standard marked with a red hand. Larian's breath hissed between his teeth. "Uruks," he murmured. "They bear the mark of the white hand still." Legolas's voice was low and steady. "The servants of Saruman scattered after his fall, but some fled east. It seems they have found their way here." The orcs moved into the clearing, muttering among themselves. One kicked at the ashes of the dead fire, snarling. "Elves," it spat. "Their stink is fresh." Another grunted. "Then they're close. Spread out." Legolas's arrow flew before the words had faded. It struck the leader square in the throat, and the creature fell without a sound. In an instant, the glade erupted into chaos. Arrows hissed from the shadows, finding their marks. The orcs shrieked and charged toward the trees, but the elves were swift and unseen, their movements like wind and flame. Nendrith's blade flashed in the starlight, and 2 foes fell before him. Larian leapt from the branches, striking down another with his spear. Legolas moved among them as though dancing, each arrow loosed with deadly calm. When at last the last cry faded, the clearing lay strewn with the dead. Only one orc remained alive, crawling feebly among the fallen. Legolas stepped forward, pressing his boot upon the creature's wrist. "Who sent you into these lands?" he demanded. The orc spat, bloodied and defiant. "No master now," it growled, "but the voice still calls. From the east, from the deep places, we follow where it leads." "What voice?" said Legolas sharply. The orc laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You'll see, elf. The dark never dies. It only sleeps." Then it spat again and fell still. For a long while none spoke. The forest was silent save for the sigh of the wind through the branches. At last, Larian said, "Do you believe its words?" Legolas gazed into the shadows where the orcs had come. "Yes," he said quietly. "There are whispers that come from the ruins of Mordor, voices that should not be heard. Whatever stirs there, it is not yet ended. They buried the dead orcs beneath the earth, lest carrion beasts defile the woods, and at dawn rode west to bear word to the king." When they reached Minas Tirith, the city shone like a vision of white stone and silver banners. Yet even in her beauty, the guards at the gate saw the weariness upon their faces and ushered them swiftly to the citadel. Aragorn listened in silence as Legolas told of the orc band and the dying creature's words. When the tale was done, the king stood long by the window, gazing eastward. "The darkness was vast," he said at last. "It cannot vanish in a single age. Some fragments of it will cling to the bones of the world until the end of days, but we will not let it rise again." He turned back to Legolas. "You have done rightly to bring this news. I will send riders to the southern marches and strengthen the watch upon the borders, yet I fear this is but a foretaste of what lies ahead." Legolas bowed his head. Then I will go once more to Ithilien and keep watch there. The forest will not fall into shadow while I walk beneath its boughs." Aragorn clasped his hand. "May the valor guard you, my friend. You have the heart of the old world in you still, and I think it will be long before such hearts are born again." That night a feast was held in the Hall of Kings, though its joy was tempered by the news of the unrest. Legolas sat beside the queen, Arwen Undomiel, who looked upon him with deep kindness. "The song of the sea grows louder in your eyes," she said softly. "Do you hear it even here, within these walls?" Legolas smiled faintly. "Always, my lady, yet I resist it for a time. There is still beauty to tend before I go." Arwen's gaze grew distant. "When at last you hear it no more, you will know it is time. The world changes, Legolas, but the sea waits for all our kind." He inclined his head. "Then may that day come gently." When the feast was ended, he walked once more upon the walls of Minas Tirith, gazing out across the plains toward the dark horizon. The night was clear, and the stars burned bright. Beneath their light he felt both the weight and the wonder of the age that had dawned, the age of men, bright yet fleeting, rising upon the ruins of shadow. He closed his eyes and listened. Far away beyond mountain and plain, he thought he heard the whisper of waves upon a distant shore. It was a sound both sorrowful and sweet, promising rest beyond the world's edge. But not yet. Not while forests still needed tending. Not while the memory of darkness lingered. With a deep breath, Legolas turned from the walls and descended once more to the waking city, where the torches burned, and the first light of dawn touched the white tree with gold. When spring turned to high summer, Ithilien stood in full bloom, fairer than it had been in any age remembered by men. The trees bent heavy with leaves of silver green, and the meadows between the hills blazed with wild flowers, violet and gold and pale white, as though the stars themselves had fallen to earth. Water coursed clear through every glen, and the air was rich with the hum of life. Yet though the land prospered, unease still stirred beneath its peace. Rumors came from the east, whispers of strange lights over the dead marshes and of travelers who vanished on the roads near Nirn. No armies marched and no banners flew, yet a sense of quiet dread crept through the lands once held by Sauron. Legolas heard these tidings with a troubled heart. He had thought the ruin of Mordor complete, the towers thrown down, the pits sealed, the very air freed from poison. But the words of the orc he had slain in the southern woods lingered in his mind. The dark never dies, it only sleeps. So it was that he set forth once again, this time not with a company of elves, but with a small band of the king's rangers, men seasoned by battle, swift and silent in the wild. Among them rode Faramir, steward of Gondor and prince of Ithilien, whose friendship with Legolas had grown deep in the years of rebuilding. Their journey led them eastward, beyond the fertile vales and the new groves, into lands still scarred by war. The air grew dry and harsh, the soil gray and lifeless. Here and there the bones of old towers jutted from the earth like the teeth of giants, and the wind sighed through them with a hollow voice. "This was once the realm of the Dark Lord," said Faramir as they rode. "No wonder the land remembers its master. Even the birds do not linger here." Legolas looked to the east, where the black mountains of Gorgoroth loomed faint upon the horizon. "Memory is strong in such places," he said. "The evil that dwelt here for ages cannot be wholly erased. But the the land itself is not evil. It is wounded, and all wounds may yet heal if they are tended with care. Faramir smiled faintly. You speak as a healer would, not a warrior. War is only the breaking, said Legolas. Healing is the greater labor. They pressed on through that desolation, camping by night among the scattered stones of old fortresses. On the third evening, as the sun sank blood-red behind the mountains, they came upon a strange sight. In a narrow vale stood a ruin, a small tower half buried by sand, its upper stones scorched black. Yet from within, its broken doorway glowed a faint light like the shimmer of embers long banked. The rangers drew their swords, but Legolas raised a hand. Wait, he said softly. There is no life here, only remembrance. He moved forward lightly, his steps soundless on the ashen earth. Within the ruin he found no fire, only a strange red gleam that flickered upon the stones. At the tower's center stood a basin carved of black marble, filled not with water but with dust that glowed faintly as though lit from within. Faramir joined him, gazing into the basin. What is it? A remnant, Legolas answered. Some relic of the sorceries once wrought here. But it is dying. See how its light fades. Even as he spoke, the glow dimmed, and the dust settled into darkness. A faint sigh passed through the ruin, as if the stones themselves had loosed their breath. They left that place behind, but the memory of it followed them like a shadow. For though the basin's light had faded, Legolas felt within it a strange sorrow, as though something unseen had been released at last. That night they camped beside a stream that wound weakly through the gray hills. The rangers kept watch while Faramir and Legolas sat together, speaking softly beneath the stars. I have heard, said Faramir, that you and your kind will one day leave these shores. Is it true? Legolas was silent for a moment before answering. It is true. The sea calls us, and in the end, no elf may resist it. But I have not yet chosen that road. While the forests still grow and the songs of the earth are not silenced, I will remain. And when you go, said Faramir, what then of the friendship between our peoples? It will not end, Legolas said quietly. The deeds of elves may fade into legend, but the bond between us and the race of men will not be forgotten. For we have fought and bled together, and that memory will outlast us all. Before Faramir could reply, a cry rose from the watchman, a short, sharp call of warning. In an instant, both men were on their feet, swords and bows in hand. From the darkness beyond the stream came a low growl, deep and guttural. Then shapes emerged, wolves, great and gaunt, their eyes burning red in the starlight. Wargs, hissed one of the rangers. I thought them all slain. Not all, said Legolas grimly. Some fled east when their masters fell, and now they have returned. The wolves circled the camp, snarling, their breath steaming in the cold night air. There were at least a dozen, lean with hunger, yet fierce with cunning. The rangers formed a ring, shields locked, torches raised. Faramir stood beside Legolas, sword drawn. Hold, said the elf softly. Wait for their charge. It came swiftly. With a chorus of howls, the wargs leapt from the shadows. Arrows flew and torches blazed. The first beast fell with an arrow through its eye, then another, but the rest crashed upon the line like a black tide. Steel rang and the air filled with the scent of blood and smoke. Legolas moved like lightning, his arrows finding their marks even in the chaos. A warg lunged at him, jaws wide, but he spun aside and drove his knife deep into its throat. Faramir fought back to back with him, his sword cutting down another that sprang from the dark. At last, the last beast fell, thrashing upon the earth before lying still. The air was thick with the iron tang of blood. One of the rangers knelt, panting. "By the valor," he muttered, "what drives such creatures to madness? They do not hunt so far alone." Legolas bent to examine the fallen warg. Around its neck hung a collar of twisted metal, marked with faint red runes. His face darkened. This is no wild pack. They are bound, driven by the same craft that once enslaved the trolls of the northern forest. Faramir stared at him. "Then the evil you fought in Mirkwood lives still? Or has learned anew how to rise?" said Legolas. "But who now wields such power, I cannot guess. They buried the dead and burned the beasts before dawn, lest their corruption spread. When the first light touched the barren hills, the smoke rose straight into the sky, black against the morning gold. As they watched, Faramir said, "What will you do now?" Legolas's gaze was fixed upon the east, where the mountains glimmered faint and gray. "I will go farther," he said. "If some shadow has returned, it must be faced before it grows. You should return to Minas Tirith and warn the king." Faramir grasped his arm. "Then may the grace of the valor guard your path, my friend. I will do as you ask." When they parted, the wind stirred through the desolate land, carrying with it the faintest echo of a cry, not of beast nor man, but something older, hollow and cold. Legolas turned toward it, his heart heavy yet resolute, for he knew that the peace they had won was fragile as morning mist, and that the work of cleansing Middle-earth was far from done. And as he walked alone into the gray hills, the light of the rising sun fell upon him, bright upon his hair, pale upon his cloak, and he seemed to the watching rangers like a flame moving against the shadow, steadfast and unyielding in the new age of the world. The land through which Legolas now passed was one few living things dared to tread. Once, in the long-shadowed ages, it had been the very heart of Sauron's dominion, Gorgoroth, the black plain where the fires of Orodruin had burned day and night. Now, years after the fall of the Dark Lord, the mountain slept, but its breath still lingered in the earth. The ground was cracked and dark, and sometimes from the depths came faint whispers of heat, as if the land dreamed restlessly of its old torment. Legolas rode alone upon a rod, swift and silent across that dead plain. The wind carried no scent here, no song of bird or rustle of leaf. Only the whisper of ashes followed him. The silence was deep, yet not empty. It pressed upon the mind, filled with memory and warning. He felt it as one feels the gaze of something unseen, old and waiting. By night, he camped upon the high ridges where once the watchfires of the orcs had burned. Now only stone and dust remained, and the stars looked cold upon the desolation. Often, as he lay wakeful, he heard faint sounds drifting through the dark. A clatter of stone, a sigh like breath drawn in pain. He knew these were echoes, not of living things, but of the past itself. Too heavy, yet to fade. On the third night, he found the remnants of a road running eastward, paved with black stone that glimmered faintly under the moon. He followed it until it rose into the foothills at the base of arid Lethui, the Ash Mountains. There he came upon a narrow ravine, and within it a cave mouth, half veiled by stone and shadow. A foul smell issued from it, rank and cold. Legolas dismounted and drew his bow. He entered lightly, each step measured, the faint glow of his elven sight revealing the rough walls. Deeper he went until he saw signs that the cave was not natural, marks of tools upon the stone, and faint symbols carved long ago. In the dust were footprints, some small, some vast and heavy. At the cavern's heart he came upon a sight that chilled even his elven heart. A pit yawned before him, deep and dark, from which a red light glowed faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Around it lay the remnants of strange devices, shattered rings of iron, broken chains, and the bones of creatures both man and beast. Upon one of the walls was scrawled a mark in dried blood, a circle of fire with a line drawn through its heart. Legolas gazed upon it long, his face grave. "The servants of the Eye have not all forgotten," he murmured. "Some seek to rekindle that which was lost." A soft sound broke the silence, a footfall behind him. He turned swiftly, arrow nocked. A figure stood in the passage, cloaked and hooded, holding a staff that gleamed faintly in the red light. "Peace, elf of the wood," said a voice low and calm. "I am no servant of the shadow." The stranger stepped forward, and Legolas beheld a man, tall and lean, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes keen and bright. "Who are you?" Legolas asked. "I am Morwen's son called Hallis," said the man, "a wanderer of Gondor, sent to seek what evil may still lurk in these wastes. I saw your fire by night and followed it, for few would dare this road save one with purpose." Legolas studied him a moment longer, then lowered his bow. "Your courage is rare among men. Few would come so near to Mordor's heart. I have seen enough of its evil to know it must be watched," said Hallis. "Even the ashes may hide embers." Together they examined the pit. The red glow seemed to come not from flame, but from some stone or crystal buried deep below, pulsing faintly as though alive. Hallis crouched beside it, frowning. "This is strange craft, not the work of men nor yet of dwarves. It bears the mark of the enemy." Legolas nodded. "I have seen such light before, in the north. A remnant of the sorceries that bound the trolls. The power that once fed it should be spent, but perhaps not all was destroyed." As they spoke, the air grew thick and heavy, the red glow deepening. The ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, and from the pit rose a sound like distant thunder, a murmur, or perhaps a voice, whispering in a tongue neither of them knew. Hallis stepped back, eyes wide. "By the valor, what is this?" Legolas's voice was steady, a memory made living, the shadow of a will that refuses to die. He drew an arrow tipped with silver and set it to his bow. "Stand clear." He loosed it into the pit. The arrow struck the heart of the red light and vanished. For a moment there was silence, then a flash of white fire so bright it seared the eyes. A roar filled the cave, and the ground shuddered as though the mountain itself cried out. When the light faded, the glow was gone. Smoke rose from the pit, black and acrid. Legolas stood still, his hair stirred by the dying wind. "It is ended," he said quietly. "Whatever remained here has been broken." Hallis let out a breath. "And yet I wonder if the world will ever be free of such remnants. Evil is like root rot. It hides deep, and even when the tree seems whole, it festers beneath." Legolas looked toward the faint dawn that was breaking beyond the cave mouth. "Then we must be its gardeners. We cannot heal all the world, but we can tend the places we find." They left the cave and climbed to the ridge above, where the first light of morning spilled over the mountains. Below them the plain stretched vast and silent, its darkness softened by the sun. For the first time, Legolas thought he saw a glimmer of green, tiny shoots breaking through the ash. Hollis followed his gaze. "It seems the land itself hears your words." "Not mine," said Legolas. "Only the world's own desire to live again." They made their way westward together for several days, speaking little, for the desolation weighed heavily upon them. But as they neared the borders of Ithilien, the air grew sweeter, and once more the sound of birds reached their ears. When at last they parted, Hollis bowed low. "If ever Gondor forgets what was done here," he said, "may your people remind us. And if ever the elves forget the courage of men," Legolas replied, "I will remind them." So they went their separate ways, and the tale of their meeting passed quietly into the lore of Ithilien. Legolas returned to the green woods by the Anduin, where his companions welcomed him with glad cries. Yet though peace had returned, he felt a weariness upon his heart, a longing that no forest could wholly ease. Often he walked alone beside the river, watching the sunlight upon the water, and in its murmur he heard once more the call of the sea, soft, insistent, and sorrowful. The time was drawing near, though he did not yet name it so. The world was changing, and the elves who had walked through its morning must soon take leave of its noonday. Still he lingered a little longer, tending the young trees and teaching men the ways of the forest. And when the evening wind passed through the leaves, it seemed to carry both farewell and promise, the mingling of all ages, the sigh of a world made new, and the fading song of those who had loved it first. The years passed like ripples upon a quiet stream, and the realm of Gondor entered its golden peace. Minas Tirith shone again with banners of white and silver, her towers gleaming in the sun, and the lands about Ithilien grew fair beyond all telling. The woods planted by Legolas spread far and wide, filling the valleys with fragrance and song. Where once were ruins, now children played among the flowering trees, and the laughter of men and elves mingled freely in the air. Yet even as joy returned, a slow yearning stirred in Legolas's heart. He felt it most when the world was still, when the wind whispered over the leaves, or when he watched the Anduin shining beneath the stars. It was not sorrow nor restlessness, but something older, deeper, the call of the sea that no elf could silence forever. Oft at twilight, he would climb the hills of Emin Arnon and gaze westward, where beyond leagues of field and forest, the white gulls flew. Their cries came faint, yet clear to his keen ears, piercing him with a strange sweetness. Then his companions would find him standing silent, his eyes distant as though he listened to a song none other could hear. One evening, as the light of sunset turned the woods to gold, Aragorn came riding from the city. His hair was touched with gray now, but his bearing was yet proud and strong. When he saw Legolas among the trees, his face lit with joy, and they embraced as brothers. "Too long has it been since last we spoke beneath these boughs," said the king. "I feared the cares of my throne had driven me too far from old friends." "You will ever be welcome in these woods," replied Legolas warmly. "They owe their life to your reign, as much as to my tending." Aragorn smiled. "Yet I see in your eyes a shadow of longing. Do not deny it, my friend. The sea calls you still." Legolas turned his gaze toward the west, where the last light of day faded upon the horizon. "Yes," he said quietly. "It grows stronger with every season. At times I think I hear the sound of waves even here beneath the leaves. But but there is still much to do before I may answer that call." They walked together beside the river, speaking long of the days they had shared, the fellowship, the battles, the long road from darkness to dawn. But when silence fell between them, Aragorn said, "When at last you go, take with you my blessing. For the world of men will pass swiftly, but I would have it remembered that the friendship between our kindreds did not end with war." Legolas bowed his head. "It shall be so. No wind or wave will bear away the memory of what we have shared." When the king departed the next morning, the forest seemed quieter, as though it too mourned his leaving. Legolas stood long watching the white banner fade into the distance. Then he turned northward, for he had resolved to visit once more his father's halls before his time in Middle-earth came to an end. He took only Larion with him, his oldest companion, and together they rode through the green valleys, where the shadows of the Ephel-Duath lay far behind them. For many days they traveled, and with each league the land grew more familiar. The rolling plains of Rohan, the banks of the Entwash, and at last the eaves of Aaron Lascalin, the great forest of his youth. It was early autumn when they entered the woods. The leaves had begun to turn to gold, and the air was filled with their whispering. As they rode beneath the tall beeches, Legolas felt once more the comfort of his homeland, though it seemed quieter now, gentler than he remembered. The power and pride of the old days were fading, leaving behind a peace both sad and beautiful. At last they came to the great gates of Thranduil's halls. The guards hailed them with gladness, for word of the prince's coming had already spread. When Legolas entered the hall, his father rose from his throne, tall and proud still, though his hair shone now like frost upon sunlight. "My son," said Thranduil, and his voice was both joyful and grave, "long have I waited for your return." Legolas knelt before him, and Thranduil lifted him swiftly to his feet. "You have done all that I could have hoped," said the king. "Aaron Lesgalen is whole again, and the name of the woodland realm is honored in every land. Yet I see the same light in your eyes that I saw in your mother's when she first spoke of the sea." Legolas did not deny it. "It calls me, father. But I could not depart without seeing you once more, nor without giving thanks for the home that made me what I am." Thranduil smiled faintly. "You were always restless, even as a child. I knew that the world beyond these trees would claim you. Go when your heart bids you, and carry the memory of this forest with you. For though the elves will fade, the memory of green things shall never die." For many weeks, Legolas remained in Aaron Lesgalen, walking once more the glades of his youth, and speaking with the elves who yet dwelt there. They sang together beneath the stars, songs of the elder days, when Middle-earth was young. Yet even in those songs there was the note of farewell, a sweetness tinged with grief. When at last he took his leave, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The leaves fell softly around him like golden rain, and the trees whispered in the tongue of the elves, "Namaria, Legolas, Thranduillion, the world grows dimmer for your going." He rode south again with Larion, but his heart was no longer bound to the land beneath his feet. Each night, as they camped beneath the stars, he dreamed of white shores and the sound of waves. And when they came once more to Ithilien, the river's voice seemed to echo that same song. Upon the green slopes near the Anduin, he built a small haven, fair and hidden among the trees. There, in the years that followed, he dwelt still among men, tending the forest and teaching the lore of the elves to those who wish to learn. Yet none failed to see that he grew more silent with time, his gaze ever turned toward the west. Then came the day when word reached him that King Elisar, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, had laid down his crown and passed beyond the circles of the world. When Legolas heard it, he said nothing, but those who stood near him saw tears upon his face. That evening, he walked alone to the river and stood long in the twilight, listening to the murmur of the water. Larian came at last and found him there. "Will you go now?" he asked quietly. "Yes," said Legolas, "the sea calls, and my dearest friend has gone before me. I can remain no longer." Together they began the final labor of their age. From the trees of Ithilien, they felled white timbers and shaped them with elven craft, fair and strong. They built a ship slender as a leaf, yet steadfast as steel, its prow carved like a swan's head, its sails pale as the morning mist. When all was ready, Legolas stood upon the deck and looked once more upon the green land he had loved. "Here ends my road in Middle-earth," he said softly. "May the forests ever bloom, and the memory of the elves endure in song." Then as the sun sank red beyond the western hills, the ship loosed from its mooring and glided upon the river, swift and silent as a dream. The wind filled its sails, carrying it down the Anduin toward the sea. Upon the shore, those who watched said they heard faint singing borne upon the breeze, clear and sorrowful, fading into the distance until it was lost beyond sight and sound. Thus did Legolas Greenleaf, son of Thranduil, pass from the fading world, keeping his promise to his friend, and with him went the last echo of the elder days. And though his ship was never seen again, those who walk by the shores of the western sea in quiet twilight sometimes say they hear the whisper of his song among the waves, where the foam is white beneath the stars. Long years had passed since the white ship slipped down the Anduin, gliding toward the sea like a ghost of light upon dark waters. Yet the tale of Legolas Greenleaf did not end when he vanished beyond the horizon. Among men his name lived on in song and legend, and in the woods of Ithilien the trees still whispered with a life and grace not known in any other land of Middle-earth. The forest he planted remained fair and undying, as if it too remembered its maker. In the early years after his passing, the people of Gondor said that strange music could sometimes be heard on still nights along the river, soft and distant like harps played beyond the veil of mist. The wardens of Emin Arnin told how the leaves shone faintly by moonlight, and how the air seemed to carry a memory of elven laughter. They said that when the west wind stirred the branches, it brought the scent of the sea, though the coast lay far away. And yet, far beyond the reach of men's voices, Legolas's journey continued. The white ship sailed down the broad river until it reached the open sea, where the stars burned like silver fire upon the waves. The wind was gentle, filled with the salt of the world's edge, and it carried the vessel ever westward. Beside him stood his faithful companion, Gimli, son of Glóin, who had begged to go with him on this final voyage, bound by friendship that no doom could part. The elf and the dwarf stood together upon the deck, the starlight glimmering in their eyes. For a time they said nothing, content to hear the sigh of the waves and the creak of the timbers beneath their feet. Then Gimli spoke, his voice gruff but softened by wonder. "So this is the sea you spoke of so often," he said. "A strange thing it is, endless and untamed. I had imagined it loud as thunder, yet it whispers like a sleeping giant. Legolas smiled faintly. Its voice changes with its mood, Master Dwarf. Sometimes it sings, sometimes it roars, but always it calls. And it called you, said Gimli, glancing at him. I can see that now. I begin to understand why no elf can resist it. There's something in it of all beginnings and all endings. They sailed on through the long night, and when dawn came, they saw before them a light upon the horizon. White and pure, growing brighter as they neared. The air grew clearer, and the scent of flowers came upon the breeze. Then, as the sun rose, the light broke wide, and before them lay a shore fairer than any land of Middle-earth. White sands stretched to meet the sea, and beyond them rose green hills, clothed in trees that shone as if lit from within. Birds of bright plumage wheeled in the air, and the sound of their song was like joy made into music. The ship slowed as it neared the shore, its sails folding like the wings of a swan. Legolas gazed upon that land in wonder, his heart filled with both sorrow and peace. Behold, Gimli, he said softly, the undying lands, the home of the Valar, and the last refuge of our kind. The dwarf stood beside him silent, his eyes wide with awe. By Durin's beard, he murmured, I have seen many halls in my days, deep and high, yet none such as this. Do you think they will welcome a dwarf here, Legolas? Legolas placed a hand upon his shoulder. If they welcome me, they will welcome you. For the valor, honor, friendship, and yours is the truest I have known. The ship glided gently to the sand, and the waves lapped softly against its hull. Legolas stepped ashore first, his feet sinking into the cool, white sand. For a moment he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the peace of that place settle upon him like a benediction. Then he turned and helped Gimli down beside him. Together they walked inland. The grass beneath their feet was soft and shining, and every leaf upon the trees seemed to sing as the wind passed through it. They came to a hill crowned with golden Eleanor, and there Legolas paused, gazing out over the sea they had crossed. I did not think I would ever see this place, said Gimli. A dwarf in the blessed realm, my kin would call it folly, yet here I stand. You stand where your heart has earned its place, replied Legolas. The world beyond is fading, Gimli. Men will rule the lands we knew, and our names will pass into memory. But here there is no decay, no shadow, no ending. And yet, said Gimli, his eyes turning wistful, I think I shall miss the noise of hammer and forge, and the deep halls under the mountain. Even peace, my friend, can be strange to those who have fought too long. Legolas laughed softly, the sound like wind among leaves. Then we shall build anew, if your hands still yearn for craft. The valor will not deny us that small labor. So they remained there, elf and dwarf, companions beyond all bounds of their kind. The elves of the Blessed Realm received them with wonder, for never before had such a pair come across the sea together. Yet none questioned their right, for the friendship that had bridged the oldest enmity in the world was a thing of grace and legend. In time, Gimli built for himself a small hall upon the western cliffs, carved from white stone that shone like marble in the sun. Legolas planted trees about it, tall malorns whose silver leaves whispered in the sea breeze. Often they would sit together in the evenings, watching the sun sink beyond the waves, speaking of the world they had left behind, of Aragorn and Arwen, of the Shire, of the long road from Rivendell to Mordor. And though the passing of years touched them lightly in that undying land, they knew that their time in the circles of the world was drawing near its true end. For no mortal may live forever in Ammon, and even the elves who came across the sea felt the slow, sweet weariness of fulfillment, the peace that lies at the end of all journeys. One evening, as the sky deepened into twilight and the first stars kindled above the horizon, Gimli spoke again, his voice quieter than the murmur of the waves. "Legolas," he said, "when my time comes, will you stay a while longer? For though I am not of your kind, I would not have my friend follow me too soon into the halls beyond." Legolas turned his eyes westward where the sea shone silver in the fading light. "I will remain as long as I may," he said, "but when you go, I shall follow at last into the final shadow, for no light here will seem bright without your laughter beside it." The dwarf smiled and gripped his friend's hand. "Then all is well," he said, "for we have journeyed farther than any could dream, and no sea or star shall part us in memory." The days that followed were full of peace. The land of the Valar knew no sorrow, yet in its quiet beauty there was remembrance, the echo of the world they had left, and the love that had bound all free peoples in their long war against the dark. So ended the tale of Legolas and Gimli, last of the fellowship to depart the circles of Middle-earth. And though no mortal eye beheld their final rest, it is said that when the stars are bright over the western sea, two figures may still be seen walking upon the shore, one tall and fair, the other stout and sturdy, speaking softly together as the waves break upon the sand. Thus passed the last echo of the elder days, and the world of men went on into its age of dominion. Yet the memory of that friendship endured, shining through the years like the light of Arundel's star, reminding all who heard it that even in the darkest of times, loyalty and love may bridge the deepest divides. And so the song of Legolas Greenleaf lived on, not in power or glory, but in the simple grace of his heart. The heart that had loved forest and star, friend and foe alike, and had sailed beyond the sunset to bring peace to both worlds, until time itself grew still,